He was a titan of industry, a man who could move markets with a single phone call. Beside him stood his sharp, stunning new partner, a woman who matched his ambition. Together, they were the ultimate power couple, commanding the attention of everyone at the city's most exclusive charity gala. But then a woman walked past their table, a vision in emerald silk with an aura of confidence so bright it seemed to dim the chandeliers. They watched her captivated. The husband felt a strange, unsettling flicker of familiarity, a ghost of a memory he couldn't place. His mistress saw only a rival. Neither of them had any idea they were staring at the woman he had discarded just 1 year ago, and that her quiet passage was the beginning of his end. The air in the Walsh penthouse was always a carefully controlled 72 degrees, a temperature Preston Walsh had decided was optimal for productivity and comfort. For Avery Walsh, it was perpetually cold. She stood in the cavernous minimalist kitchen, a stark landscape of white marble and gleaming chrome, arranging canapes on a slate platter. Each tiny toast with smoked salmon and dill was a miniature work of art, a testament to the meticulous care she poured into every facet of their lives. Tonight was important. Preston was courting investors for his new venture fund, and their guests were the kind of people who didn't just own wealth, they inhabited it, breathing its rarefied air. Avery had orchestrated the evening with the precision of a military general. The catering was from Jean-Georges, the flowers were flown in from Holland, and the soft jazz trio in the living room had been booked 6 months in advance. She smoothed down her simple navy blue dress, a dress Preston had once called serviceable. It was her uniform, the attire of the woman behind the man. She had long ago packed away her own dreams of being an art historian, her vibrant canvases and charcoal sketches, to become the silent architect of Preston Walsh's world. He was the brilliant CEO of Walsh Capital Partners. She was his domestic manager, a term he'd used with a dismissive chuckle at his last company party. The phrase had stung more than she'd let on a tiny sharp shard, lodging itself near her heart. "Are they ready?" Preston's voice boomed from the doorway. He was already in his tuxedo, a masterpiece of tailoring that made him look less like a man and more like a monument to success. His eyes, the color of cold steel, scanned the platters, not her. "Almost," she said softly. "Just the finishing touches." He grunted, adjusting his cufflinks. "Make sure you stay in the background tonight, Avery. These are serious people. We need to project an image of seamless efficiency. No distractions." A distraction. That's what she was. A piece of the furniture that might be out of place. She nodded, her throat tight. Of course, Preston. The guests arrived, a wave of expensive perfume, booming laughter, and the clinking of champagne flutes. Avery moved through her home like a ghost, ensuring glasses were filled, directing the hired staff, and tidying away discarded napkins. She saw Preston holding court, his voice, confident and charismatic. Hanging on his arm was Nicole Beaumont. Nicole was a junior partner at his firm, a woman who was everything Avery wasn't. She was sharp-edged and glossy, her laughter like shattering glass. Her dress was a sliver of crimson silk that clung to her athletic frame, and her conversation was peppered with financial jargon that Avery didn't understand. She watched as Preston placed a proprietary hand on the small of Nicole's back, leaning in to whisper something in her ear that made her throw her head back and laugh. It wasn't the first time. Avery had seen the lingering glances, the late-night strategy sessions, the shared jokes that excluded her. She had chosen to ignore it, telling herself it was just business. Preston needed a partner who could spar with him intellectually in a way she no longer could. She had convinced herself this was another sacrifice required for his success. Later, hidden in the relative quiet of the hallway leading to the kitchen, she overheard two of the guests, their voices low and conspiratorial. "That's his wife," one woman whispered, nodding towards Avery as she handed a fresh tray to a server. "The one in the navy dress. She's very plain." "She's from old money, I heard," the other replied, "but no ambition of her own. Preston needs a powerhouse like Nicole. Look at them together. They just make sense." The words landed like physical blows. Avery retreated to the kitchen, her hands trembling. She looked at her reflection in the polished chrome of the refrigerator. Plain, serviceable, a distraction. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, her eyes hollow, her shoulders slumped under the weight of an identity that wasn't hers. The final straw came near the end of the evening. One of the key investors, a jovial man named Robert Coleman, approached her as she was overseeing the dessert course. "You've done a marvelous job, Mrs. Walsh," he said kindly. "Preston is a lucky man. An operation this smooth doesn't just happen." Before Avery could muster a thank you, Preston and Nicole appeared at his side. Preston clapped Robert on the back, a wide, artificial smile plastered on his face. "Robert, glad you're enjoying yourself," he boomed. He then gestured vaguely towards Avery. "Oh, don't mind her. Avery is a master of the invisible arts. Honestly, half the time I forget she's even here." He laughed, and Nicole joined in a high, tinkling sound that grated on Avery's raw nerves. Robert Coleman looked from Preston's dismissive face to Avery's pale, stricken one. The kindness in his eyes curdled into something like pity. And in that moment, the shard of glass near Avery's heart didn't just twist. It shattered, sending a million tiny, sharp pains through her entire being. "Forget she's even here." The words echoed in the sudden silence of her mind. He hadn't just forgotten her dreams. He had forgotten her very existence. She was a function, a service, a ghost in her own life. She waited until the last guest had departed, until the staff had cleared the final glass, and the jazz trio had packed their instruments. The penthouse was silent, save for the hum of the city far below. Preston was in his study, likely celebrating with Nicole over a glass of expensive scotch. Avery walked into their master bedroom, a vast, impersonal space of grey and beige. She didn't pack a suitcase. She didn't write a note. She simply took off the navy blue dress and let it fall to the floor like a shed skin. She opened her jewelry box, ignoring the diamonds and pearls Preston had bought her as obligatory gifts. In a velvet-lined compartment at the very bottom lay a simple silver locket, a gift from her late grandmother. It held a picture of a younger Avery, paint-smeared and smiling, a girl who believed she could capture the world with a brush. She clasped it around her neck. Then, wearing only a simple blouse and trousers she found in the back of the closet, she took the keys to her modest car, the one Preston called her errand mobile, and walked out of the penthouse. She didn't look back. The invisible woman had finally vanished, but this time it was on her own terms. The first 72 hours were a blur of cheap motel coffee and the suffocating silence of 4 beige walls. The shock had given way to a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Avery Walsh, the wife, the hostess, the domestic manager, was gone. In her place was just Avery, and she had no idea who that was. On the 4th day, she made a phone call that terrified her more than walking out of her old life. She called Barbara Stone, a divorce attorney, whose reputation was whispered with a mixture of fear and awe in the city's elite circles. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a demolition expert for gilded cages. "Mrs. Walsh." Barbara's voice was crisp, devoid of sympathy. "I must admit, I'm surprised to hear from you. I've followed your husband's career. You've been very discreet." "I'm no longer Mrs. Walsh," Avery heard herself say, the words feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. "And I have no intention of being discreet." The meeting was in a sterile, intimidating boardroom. Barbara Stone, with her severe haircut and eyes that missed nothing, listened intently as Avery recounted 10 years of quiet sacrifices and public humiliations culminating in the party. She didn't cry. Her voice was steady, fueled by a cold, unfamiliar anger. "He called me invisible." Avery finished, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He said he forgets I'm there." Barbara leaned forward, a predator, sensing a weakness in her target. "Good," she said, a thin smile on her lips. "Invisibility is a superpower. He won't see us coming. We won't go for a messy public fight. We will execute a surgical strike. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, but it has a lifestyle clause he has flagrantly violated with his infidelity. We won't take half, but we will take enough to make him feel it. We will take your seed money." While Barbara sharpened her legal knives, Avery began the painstaking work of rediscovering herself. She drove to the state university she'd abandoned 20 credits, shy of her master's in art history. The campus felt both familiar and alien. She found her way to the arts building and stood outside the office of her former mentor, Professor Albright. She knocked, her heart pounding. The door opened, and a man with a wild mane of white hair and paint stains on his tweed jacket blinked at her. His eyes, magnified by thick glasses, widened in recognition. Avery Miller, is that you?" he exclaimed, using her maiden name. Tears welled in her eyes for the first time since she'd left. To be seen to be remembered as the person she was before was an unexpected balm. She spent the next 3 hours in his cluttered turpentine-scented office, pouring out her story. He listened, nodding his gaze, never leaving her face. When she was done, he didn't offer pity. He stood up, walked over to a dusty flat file in the corner, and pulled out a large paper-bound portfolio. He laid it on the desk and opened it. Inside were her old charcoals, her vibrant, abstract paintings, the work of a student with a raw, undeniable talent. "I kept these," he said simply. "I always believed this was a voice that was silenced too soon. The art world is different now, Avery. It's more commercial, more aggressive, but it's also more open to new perspectives. Your eye, you always had the eye. Not just for creating, but for seeing, for curating." That conversation was the spark. The idea took root, a fragile seedling in the barren soil of her confidence. A gallery. Not just any gallery, but a place that would champion emerging artists, the ones with silenced voices like her own. The divorce settlement was finalized 6 months later. It was as Barbara had promised, a surgical strike. Preston, furious and blindsided by her audacity, fought back. But evidence of his affair with Nicole was irrefutable, and the quiet, serviceable wife he'd underestimated had an advocate who was anything but. He was forced to sign over a significant, but not crippling sum. It was a fraction of his net worth, but to him, the insult was greater than the financial dent. He saw it as a severance package for a long-term employee, nothing more. He signed the papers, had Nicole move into the penthouse, and never gave Avery a second thought. He was sure she would crawl back in a year, her money squandered on some foolish hobby. Avery used every penny of that severance package. She didn't buy a new apartment or a luxury car. She lived in a small rented studio and poured her capital and her soul into her project. She incorporated her business under a name that came to her in the middle of the night, Phoenix Arts. She spent months flying under the radar, reconnecting with Professor Albright's contacts, attending small art fairs in forgotten corners of the country, and building a roster of artists whose work was passionate, raw, and utterly brilliant. She found a location in the city's burgeoning gallery district, a dilapidated warehouse she got for a steal. She hired a young, ambitious architect, and together they transformed the space into a minimalist marvel of polished concrete, exposed brick, and soaring ceilings. The physical transformation came next, but it wasn't the goal. It was a byproduct of her newfound purpose. The stress of her old life had been replaced by the invigorating exhaustion of building something of her own. She started rising at dawn to run along the river, the steady rhythm of her feet on the pavement, a mantra of forward momentum. She traded her shapeless dresses for tailored trousers and silk blouses, clothes that were not for hiding but for commanding a room. She cut her mousy brown hair into a sharp, sophisticated bob that framed a face now defined by confidence rather than anxiety. The hollows in her eyes were gone, replaced by a focused, intelligent light. 1 year to the day after she walked out of the penthouse Phoenix Arts was ready to launch, she stood in the middle of her gallery, the walls adorned with breathtaking art she had personally discovered. The space was silent, waiting. She looked at her reflection in the large plate-glass window. The woman staring back was no longer a ghost. She was an architect, a founder. She was Avery, and she was finally completely visible to herself. The first few months of Phoenix Arts were a brutal, exhilarating grind. The art world was a closed ecosystem, notoriously wary of outsiders. Avery wasn't just an outsider. She was a phantom, a name with no history, no pedigree. The initial buzz around the gallery was minimal, confined to a few niche art blogs and the local neighborhood paper. The established critics and collectors ignored her. Preston, had he been paying attention, would have smirked. It was exactly the kind of vanity project he'd predicted she'd fail at. But Preston wasn't paying attention. He was busy closing a major merger and celebrating his success with Nicole on the beaches of St. Bart's. Avery Walsh was a footnote in a chapter of his life he had already closed. Avery knew she needed to make a splash, a move so bold it would be impossible to ignore. She pored over auction catalogues and industry reports, her nights spent researching, cross-referencing, and following the faint trails of private sales. Her target wasn't a single famous painting, but something far more strategic, the reputation of a collector. She discovered that a small but highly influential collection of post-war abstract expressionism, the Haverford Collection, was rumored to be coming up for private sale. Its owner, a reclusive industrialist, was liquidating assets. The collection was a tastemaker's dream, containing early works by artists who were now household names, but these specific pieces were from their formative, grittier periods. Owning it wouldn't just be a financial investment, it would be a statement of profound artistic insight. Securing the Haverford Collection became Avery's obsession. It was a massive gamble. It would consume nearly all of her remaining capital. Failure would mean not just closing the gallery, but personal bankruptcy. She leveraged every contact she and Professor Albright had. She spent weeks crafting a proposal that wasn't about money, but about legacy. She argued that Phoenix Arts wouldn't just house the collection. It would recontextualize it, using it as a foundation to elevate a new generation of abstract artists. She was selling a vision, not just making an offer. After a month of tense silence, she got the call. Her offer had been accepted. The news was a quiet, seismic shock. She sat alone in her gallery office, the signed contract in her trembling hands, and allowed herself a single, triumphant sob. With the Haverford Collection secured, the dynamic shifted. The art world, which runs on whispers and exclusivity, began to talk. Who was this A. Walsh? Where did Phoenix Arts come from? The acquisition was a cannonball into the placid waters of the established gallery scene. Artforum magazine ran a small piece on the sale calling it the most audacious acquisition of the season by a mysterious newcomer. Avery used the momentum perfectly. She announced the gallery's official launch event, an exclusive invitation-only viewing of the Haverford collection, combined with a showcase of her new unknown artists. The theme of the night was Legacy and Ascent. The RSVPs poured in. Critics who had ignored her calls were now clamoring for a +1. Collectors who had dismissed her as a hobbyist were now intrigued. Avery was no longer knocking on the door, she had kicked it down. As the launch approached, she meticulously planned every detail just as she had for Preston's parties. But this time, the purpose was entirely different. This wasn't about creating an invisible, seamless backdrop for a man. This was about creating a spotlight for her artists and a monument to her own rebirth. On the night of the launch, the gallery was electric. The raw industrial space was softened by strategic lighting that made the art pop. A string quartet played contemporary classical music, a stark contrast to the safe jazz Preston had always preferred. Avery moved through the crowd not as a phantom servant, but as the gracious and commanding host. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored black dress, her only jewelry the old silver locket tucked discreetly beneath the neckline. She spoke with critics about brushwork and provenance, with collectors about market trends and artistic intent. The language that had once been the domain of her abandoned studies now flowed from her with an easy-earned authority. She introduced her young artists to influential patrons watching with pride as connections were forged. Robert Coleman, the kind investor from that fateful party, was there. He approached her, his eyes wide with admiration. "Avery," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "I almost didn't recognize you. This is incredible. What you've built." "Thank you for coming, Robert." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I have to be honest." He leaned in conspiratorially. "After I saw how Preston treated you that night, I pulled my investment from his new fund. A man who doesn't see the value right in front of him is not a man I trust with my money." Avery was stunned. It was a small personal victory she had never known about a quiet act of decency that affirmed her decision. By the end of the night, Phoenix Arts was a resounding success. 3 of her emerging artists had sold out their entire showcase. A major museum curator had expressed interest in loaning a piece from the Haverford collection. And Art Forum was running a feature story not on the mysterious newcomer, but on Avery Walsh, the art world's new visionary. She stood at the large front window, long after the last guest had left, looking out at the glittering city. A year ago, she had been a ghost in a penthouse in that same city. Now she was a force. She had not only built a business, she had built a new identity forged in passion and resilience. And she had done it all without ever thinking of Preston Walsh. He was a ghost from a different life, a man she no longer knew, and certainly a man who would no longer recognize her. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's annual Patrons Gala was the apex of the city's social calendar. It was a glittering high-stakes affair where finance, fashion, and philanthropy collided. For Preston Walsh and Nicole Beaumont, it was a victory lap. Their merger had been finalized. Walsh Capital Partners was more powerful than ever, and their position as the city's new power couple was solidified. Preston, immaculate in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, scanned the room with a proprietary air. This was his world. These were his people. Nicole was on his arm, a vision in a daring, backless gown of liquid gold. She was radiant, sharp, and possessive, her hand resting firmly on his forearm. "Darling, the Fitzgeralds are waving at us," Nicole murmured, her smile perfectly calibrated for public consumption. "We should go and say hello. I hear he's looking to diversify his portfolio." "In a moment," Preston said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Let's make our entrance properly. Let them see us." He thrived on the attention, on the envious glances, and whispered conversations that followed in their wake. They were at the center of their universe, and the gravity of their success pulled everyone into their orbit. They took their seats at a prime table near the front of the grand ballroom, accepting greetings and air kisses from a parade of acquaintances. The room was a symphony of clinking crystal low murmurs and the flash of camera bulbs. It was during the appetizer course that the atmosphere at their table subtly shifted. A low collective whisper began to ripple through the nearby tables. Heads turned not towards the stage, but towards the grand entrance. A woman was making her way into the ballroom. She wasn't flanked by an entourage. She was alone. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that seemed to drink the light, its fabric flowing around her like water as she walked. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant chignon, showcasing a pair of stunning diamond and emerald earrings that glittered with every turn of her head. Her bearing was what truly captivated the room, a serene, unshakable confidence. She moved with a purpose and grace that made it seem as if the crowd was parting for her. "My God, who is that?" Nicole hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging slightly into Preston's arm. The question was purely rhetorical. It was a statement of threat. In a room full of beautiful and powerful women, this newcomer had instantly become the focus of all attention. Preston stared, his fork hovering midway to his mouth. He felt a strange, jarring sensation, a sense of déjà vu so strong it made the hairs on his arms stand up. There was something in the woman's posture, in the elegant line of her neck, that was hauntingly familiar. But he dismissed it instantly. The woman exuded a power and self-possession that was entirely alien to him. He didn't know anyone like that. "Probably a European heiress," he muttered, trying to sound dismissive, though his eyes remained fixed on her. Or a new actress. The woman was being led to her table, which happened to be on a direct path past theirs. As she drew closer, Preston's mind raced, flipping through a mental Rolodex of faces, trying to place her. He couldn't. She was just feet away now. Her scent drifted towards them, a subtle, sophisticated fragrance of white florals and something clean like rain. It was a scent he almost recognized, a ghost on the edge of his memory. As she passed their table, she turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over the room. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met Preston's. They were cool, intelligent, and held a glint of something he couldn't decipher. Amusement, indifference. There was not a flicker of recognition in them. It was the polite, impersonal glance one gives a stranger. And then she was gone, moving towards a table where the director of the museum and the city's most influential art critic rose to greet her with enthusiastic smiles. Preston was frozen. His blood had turned to ice water. The face, the eyes. It was impossible. It couldn't be. But the strange familiarity clicked into place with the horrifying certainty of a lock tumbling open. It was Avery. It was his mousy, serviceable, invisible Avery. But it wasn't. This woman was a different species entirely. The timid stoop was gone, replaced by a perfect posture. The anxious, pleading eyes were now calm and appraising. The face, once pale and unadorned, was now subtly sculpted by expert makeup, highlighting high cheekbones he'd never noticed she had. "Preston, Preston, are you all right?" Nicole's voice was sharp, cutting through his shock. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He couldn't speak. He just stared at the woman's back, at the way the emerald silk draped over her strong shoulders. He watched as the museum director pulled out her chair as she sat and engaged him in effortless, animated conversation. She belonged there. She looked more at home than he did. That woman. He finally managed to say, his voice a hoarse whisper. That was Avery. Nicole's perfectly made-up face contorted in disbelief, then derision. "What, don't be ridiculous. Your Avery looked like a librarian who'd lost her glasses. That woman is a goddess. You're mistaken." "No," Preston said, the certainty growing cold and terrifying. "That was her." He felt a sudden violent lurch in his gut. It was a complex cocktail of emotions he couldn't immediately name. Shock, rage, confusion, and something else, something deeply unsettling that felt almost like loss. He had discarded a broken toy. He had not anticipated it would reassemble itself into a masterpiece and put itself on display in the one place he considered his personal showroom. For the rest of the evening, he couldn't tear his eyes away from her table. He watched her laugh, charm, and command the attention of the city's cultural elite. She never once glanced in his direction. To her, he was just part of the scenery, a piece of the furniture. He was invisible. And Preston Walsh, a man who defined his existence by being seen, had never felt so completely and utterly erased. The image of Avery in the emerald dress was burned into Preston's mind. He spent the next day in a state of agitated distraction, snapping at his assistants and unable to focus on the multi-million-dollar spreadsheets displayed on his monitors. The woman who had passed his table was an impossible paradox. How had the timid creature he'd married transformed into that paragon of grace and power? His ego couldn't accept it. His first instinct was that it was a trick, a performance. She must have inherited money or found another wealthy man to bankroll her. The idea that she could have achieved this on her own was simply not within his realm of comprehension. "I want to know everything," he barked at his personal assistant, a perpetually nervous young man named David. "Find out what Avery Walsh Avery Miller, she's using her maiden name, has been doing for the past year. Where she lives, who she sees, where she got the money for that dress. Everything. And be discreet." While he waited for the information, his life with Nicole began to fray at the edges. The gala had unsettled her. She had seen the way Preston stared at Avery, the slack-jawed shock on his face. She saw the way the entire room had been captivated by her. Nicole's currency was her status as the sharp, superior woman who had replaced the dull first wife. Avery's reappearance not as a pitiable divorcee, but as a formidable presence, threatened that narrative. "I still can't believe that was her," Nicole said that night, pacing their penthouse. She must have had extensive surgery. And who was she with the museum director was practically fawning over her? "I don't know," Preston grumbled, pouring himself a third glass of scotch. "Well, you should find out." Nicole snapped, her insecurity making her sharp. "Is she a threat? Is she going to try to get more money from you? This could be a problem, Preston." The idea was almost laughable. The Avery he knew wouldn't have the courage to ask for a glass of water, let alone more money. But this new Avery, he wasn't so sure. The cold indifference in her eyes at the gala haunted him. It wasn't hatred or anger he had seen. It was nothing, and nothing was far more terrifying. Meanwhile, Avery had left the gala feeling a quiet, steady hum of victory. Seeing Preston had been anticlimactic. For a fleeting moment, as she'd walked past their table, her heart had stuttered. A ghost of the old fear, the old instinct to shrink herself, had whispered in her ear. But then she'd met his shocked gaze, and she'd felt a surprising surge of power. The hold he'd had over her was gone. Looking at him was like looking at a photograph from a distant past. The emotional connection had been severed. She was far more interested in the conversation she'd had with the museum director, who was fascinated by the Haverford collection and wanted to discuss a potential collaboration with Phoenix Arts. Her future was in front of her, exciting and full of possibilities. Her past was sitting at a table behind her, shrinking in her rear-view mirror. 2 days later, a sleek, leather-bound file landed on Preston's desk. David had been efficient. Preston dismissed him and opened it. his heart pounding with a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. The report was thorough. It detailed the creation of Phoenix Arts LLC. It included local press clippings about the gallery's opening, praising its bold new vision. It had a copy of the Art Forum piece with a stunning professional photograph of Avery in her gallery, looking directly at the camera with a small, confident smile. The headline read, "The Phoenix How Avery Miller is Remaking the Art Scene." But the final page was the one that made Preston's breath catch in his throat. It was a summary of a major private art sale that had taken place 6 months prior. Item: The Haverford Collection, Post-War Abstract Expressionism, reported sale price 8 figures. Buyer Phoenix Arts, LLC Principal, Avery Miller. Preston stared at the page, his mind refusing to process the information. The Haverford Collection. He knew of it, of course. It was a legendary, almost mythical collection. And Avery had bought it. Not with an inheritance, not with another man's money, but with the severance package he had given her. He felt a wave of nausea. He had given her the ammunition, and she had built a cannon. He thought back to her passion for art, the books she used to read, the museum trips she used to beg him to go on. He had dismissed it all as a silly, useless hobby. He had actively discouraged it, telling her to focus on things that mattered: his career, his home, his needs. He suddenly felt like a fool, a colossal, blind fool. His dismissal of her wasn't just unkind, it was a catastrophic miscalculation. He had underestimated his primary asset, treated it like a liability, and discarded it. And now that asset was outperforming his entire portfolio. The haunting was no longer just about the woman in the emerald dress. It was about the brilliant, capable person he had failed to see, the potential he had actively suppressed and mocked. A disturbing, unfamiliar thought began to creep into the edges of his mind. Maybe I was the one who was holding her back. This thought was quickly followed by a far more Preston-like one, a fierce, possessive desire. The new Avery was a success. She was powerful. She was admired. And because of that, he wanted her back. She was no longer a boring attachment to his life. She was an acquisition he had foolishly let go of, and he was a man who hated to lose. While Preston was grappling with the ghost of his past, his present was demanding his full attention. Walsh Capital Partners was on the verge of its biggest deal, yet launching a $2 billion global green technology fund. They had secured most of the capital, but the keystone investor, the one whose name would bring in a dozen others, remained elusive. His name was Jean-Luc Moreau. Moreau was a French industrialist, a reclusive old-world billionaire who had made his fortune in sustainable engineering. He was notoriously eccentric and deeply unimpressed by the brutish profit-at-all-costs attitude of modern finance. He saw most venture capitalists as vultures in expensive suits. To win him over, Preston knew he needed more than a solid prospectus and impressive projected returns. He needed to speak Moreau's language. After weeks of research, Preston's team found the key. Moreau was a fanatical, almost religious collector of post-war American art. It was his one true passion. His Paris apartment was a private museum, and he judged a man's character not by his balance sheet, but by his taste. He believed that an appreciation for great art demonstrated a capacity for vision, nuance, and long-term thinking, the very qualities he sought in a business partner. The strategy became clear. Preston couldn't just pitch numbers to Moreau. He had to host him, charm him, and demonstrate a shared passion. The plan was to invite Moreau to New York for a final meeting and host an intimate, exclusive dinner at the penthouse. The centerpiece of the evening wouldn't be a PowerPoint presentation, but a private viewing of a newly acquired masterpiece of art. It would be a signal to Moreau that Preston was not just another vulture. He was a man of substance and culture. "We need something spectacular," Preston announced to his team, which included a very attentive Nicole. "Something that shows we have our finger on the pulse. Something that will genuinely impress him." Rothko Pollock, Nicole suggested scrolling through auction sites on her tablet. Something from Sotheby's upcoming contemporary sale. "No," Preston said, his mind already working. "Too obvious. It looks like we just bought it for the occasion. We need something with a story, something with provenance, something he respects." He dispatched his top acquisitions consultant, a man named George Finch, with a single mission: find a collection or a landmark piece that would make Jean-Luc Moreau's jaw drop. A week later, Finch came back with the perfect answer. "It's the Haverford collection," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. "It's the holy grail for a collector like Moreau. It contains early raw pieces from the masters. It's not just art, it's art history. Moreau has apparently been trying to acquire it privately for years, but the previous owner was a recluse who refused to sell." Preston's heart stopped. The Haverford collection. "There's a problem, though," Finch continued, oblivious to Preston's sudden pallor. "It was sold privately about 6 months ago, a real shock to the market. It was bought by a new gallery, a place called Phoenix Arts." Nicole shot Preston a sharp, warning look across the boardroom table. The name hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Preston struggled to keep his voice even. "Phoenix Arts," he repeated the words, tasting like ash. "And who owns this gallery?" "A newcomer, brilliant by all accounts, has the whole art world talking. A woman named Avery Miller." The room was silent. Preston's team members exchanged confused glances, wondering about the sudden tension. Nicole's face was a mask of fury. This was no longer just an old ghost. It was a present-day business problem. Avery, his quiet, invisible Avery, was now the gatekeeper to the most important deal of his career. "Get them on the phone," Preston commanded, his voice tight. "Tell them we want to buy the entire collection. Name your price. I don't care what it costs. This is not negotiable." George Finch looked puzzled. "Sir, my sources say it's not for sale. The owner is using it as the foundational collection for her gallery. It's the centerpiece of her entire business strategy." "Everything is for sale, George," Preston snarled, his composure cracking. "Find the price. Make it happen." For the next 2 days, Finch tried. He made offers through official channels, starting high and escalating to figures that were frankly absurd. Each offer was met with a polite but firm refusal from Phoenix Arts. The message was always the same. The Haverford collection is the heart of our gallery and is not for sale. They wouldn't even entertain a meeting. Preston grew more and more agitated. Moreau's visit was in 2 weeks. His perfect strategy was crumbling, because the one person he had deemed worthless was now in possession of the one thing he desperately needed. The irony was so bitter it almost choked him. Nicole, seeing his desperation, tried to take control. "This is ridiculous, Preston. You're letting your past cloud your judgment. There are other collections, other paintings." "Not like this one," he roared, slamming his fist on his mahogany desk. "Moreau has a history with this collection. It's the key. She's doing this deliberately. This is revenge. She knew we were going after Moreau, and she bought it to spite me." "How could she possibly know?" Nicole argued, though a seed of doubt was planted. "She's not in our world." "She's in my head," Preston yelled, pacing his office like a caged tiger. He was wrong, of course. Avery had no idea about Jean-Luc Moreau or Preston's green tech fund. She had bought the collection as a strategic move for her own business, long before Preston had even identified Moreau as a target. Her refusal to sell had nothing to do with revenge. It was simply good business. She had a vision, and the collection was integral to it. But Preston couldn't see that. His narcissism wouldn't allow it. In his mind, the universe still revolved around him. Avery's success couldn't be her own. It had to be a reaction to him. Her blocking his deal couldn't be a coincidence. It had to be a calculated attack. With his options dwindling and the clock ticking, he realized his high-handed anonymous offers were failing. He was going to have to do something he hadn't done in over a year. He was going to have to talk to Avery himself. He would go to her hat in hand and appeal to their shared history. Her sense of decency, he wasn't sure. He just knew he had to get that collection, and the power to grant his wish lay solely in the hands of the invisible woman he had thrown away. The Phoenix Arts Gallery was a testament to Avery's vision. Sunlight streamed through the massive industrial windows, illuminating the polished concrete floors and casting a warm glow on the vibrant, challenging art that adorned the walls. It was a space that felt both serene and electric, a sanctuary of creativity. Preston Walsh felt utterly alien in it. He had arrived unannounced, striding through the glass doors as if he owned the place, an old habit he couldn't shake. The young woman at the reception desk, recognizing him from business magazines, looked momentarily flustered before Avery's voice came calmly from the main gallery floor. "It's all right, Jessica. I'll handle this." Avery emerged from behind a large, imposing sculpture. She wasn't wearing an emerald gown, but a simple cream-colored cashmere sweater, tailored grey trousers and flat leather shoes. She looked comfortable, professional, and completely in control. There was no surprise on her face, only a kind of weary resignation. She had half expected this visit ever since the barrage of increasingly desperate offers began. "Preston," she said, her voice even and cool. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. "What are you doing here?" "Avery, you look—" "Well," he stammered. Up close, her transformation was even more jarring. It was the clarity in her eyes that threw him. The woman he remembered had looked at him with a perpetual mixture of hope and fear. This woman looked at him with nothing, just calm assessment. "I am well," she replied. "This is my gallery. You are not on the visitors list, so I'll ask again, what are you doing here?" The directness disarmed him. He was used to people deferring to him, to circling his power. He took a breath and tried to regain his footing. "I'm here about the Haverford collection," he said, deciding to get straight to the point. "My company has been making you offers, substantial offers." "Yes, we've declined them," she said, turning her attention to adjusting a small plaque on the wall next to a painting. Her focus on this minor task, as if he were a secondary distraction, infuriated him. "Avery, listen to me," he said, stepping closer. "I need that collection. It's important for a deal I'm working on, a very important deal." "A deal for you," she stated, still not looking at him. "That sounds like your problem, Preston, not mine. The collection is not for sale." "Everything has a price," he insisted, his voice rising. "Name one. Just name a number. Whatever it is, I'll pay it." She finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You think this is about money. After all these years, you still think the only thing that motivates anyone is money." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "How sad for you." His frustration boiled over. He fell back on his old tactics, intimidation laced with a pathetic appeal to their shared past. "Don't do this, Avery. Don't be vindictive. It doesn't suit you. Think of everything we had. 10 years. Don't you owe me some consideration?" At the mention of their past, something finally flickered in her eyes, a spark of cold fire. "Owe you," she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Let's talk about what is owed, shall we? For 10 years, I dedicated my entire existence to you. I put my dreams in a box so you could build yours. I created a perfect world for you to come home, to a world you took for granted every single day. I made myself small, quiet, and invisible to make you feel big, and in return you humiliated me, you cheated on me, and you told me to my face that you forgot I was even there." She took a step closer, and for the first time, Preston felt a prickle of fear. He took an involuntary step back. "So no, Preston," she continued, her voice like ice. "I don't owe you a thing. You are owed nothing. What is happening right now is not revenge. To have revenge, I would have to care about you enough to want to hurt you. I don't. This is simply a business transaction, or rather, the lack of one. My asset is not for sale to you. It's that simple." He was speechless. The truth of her words was a physical blow. He had no leverage here. Money didn't work. Intimidation didn't work. Their shared history was a weapon she was now wielding against him. Desperation made him change tactics one last time. He tried charm, the oily, practiced charm that had won him so many deals. He softened his voice, attempting a look of contrition. "You're right," he said softly. "I was a fool, Avery. I was buried in my work. I lost sight of what I had. Seeing you at the gala, it woke me up. You're incredible. What you've built here is incredible. I was wrong. Terribly wrong." He reached out, as if to touch her arm. She didn't flinch or move away. She simply held his gaze, and the absolute lack of emotion in her eyes stopped his hand mid-air. "Is this the part where you tell me you want me back?" she asked, her tone laced with a weary cynicism that gutted him. "Is that the next move in your playbook, Preston? When money and threats fail, you try seduction." He had no answer. That was in fact his next move. "It's too late," she said, her voice softening, but not with warmth, with finality. "That's what you don't understand. It is simply, irreversibly too late. The woman you were married to is gone. I am not her. You can't have her back, and you certainly can't have what belongs to me." She looked past him towards the door. "Now, if you don't mind, you're distracting me from my work. Please see yourself out." Defeated, humiliated, and utterly stripped of his power, Preston Walsh turned and walked out of the sanctuary his former wife had built. The brilliant sunlight of the gallery seemed to mock him as he stepped back into the grey reality of the street. He had lost. Not just the deal, not just the art, but something far more fundamental. He had come face to face with his own colossal failure as a man, and the judgment had been delivered not with anger or tears, but with the one thing he could never compete with: utter indifference. The call from Jean-Luc Moreau's office came 2 days later. Preston took it in his office with Nicole watching him, her arms crossed. The conversation was brief. Moreau had been disappointed to learn that Walsh Capital Partners had no real connection to the art world and had engaged in a crass and aggressive attempt to purchase the Haverford collection. It demonstrated, in his words, a profound lack of foresight and nuance. He would be investing his capital elsewhere. The deal was dead. The fallout was immediate. The other investors who had been waiting for Moreau's lead grew skittish. The $2 billion fund collapsed, taking with it a significant chunk of Preston's reputation and capital. The story leaked to the financial press: Walsh Capital fumbles major green fund. His aura of invincibility was shattered. His relationship with Nicole disintegrated in the aftermath. Their partnership had been built on the foundation of success and power. With that foundation cracked, all that remained were the fault lines of resentment and blame. Nicole saw Preston's obsession with Avery as the weakness that had cost them everything. Preston saw Nicole as a shallow replacement for the substance he had unknowingly discarded. She packed her bags and left the penthouse within a month, citing his unhealthy fixation on the past. Preston was left alone in the vast, cold penthouse, haunted by the ghost of a woman who was very much alive. He found himself wandering through the rooms, noticing for the first time the small touches Avery had made, the way she'd arranged the books by colour, the specific vase she always kept on the mantelpiece. He remembered her talking excitedly about an artist she'd discovered a conversation he had cut short to take a business call. He remembered her trying to show him a sketch, which he had glanced at for half a second, before telling her it was nice. He had been living his life in black and white, and had never realized she was the one trying to paint it in color. A few months later, a story appeared on the cover of a major city magazine. The headline was, "Avery's Ascent, the New Queen of the Art World." The cover photo was of Avery standing in her gallery, looking not at the camera, but at a painting, a genuine smile of passion and fulfillment on her face. The article detailed her incredible success, her visionary eye, and her upcoming collaboration with the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Tucked into the article was a small, fascinating detail. The museum collaboration was being funded by a new philanthropic grant established by the French industrialist Jean-Luc Moreau. He had visited Phoenix Arts a few weeks after Preston's fund collapsed. He hadn't come to buy the Haverford collection, but to see it. He and Avery had apparently spent an entire afternoon discussing art. He had been so impressed by her vision and integrity that he had decided to become the primary benefactor for her gallery's educational and outreach programs. Preston let the magazine fall from his hands. It was the final, perfect checkmate. She hadn't just blocked him. She had, without even trying, won the very prize he had been seeking. She hadn't stolen his connection. She had earned it through the genuine passion he had always mocked. He was ruined, not financially. He was still a wealthy man, but ruined in a deeper, more essential way. His sense of self, built on the idea that he was the smartest, most powerful man in any room, had been dismantled. Avery, meanwhile, rarely thought of him. Her life was full of art, of new friends, of purpose. She was building a legacy. The afterglow of her past life had faded, replaced by the bright, steady light of her own making. The greatest revenge she had learned was not a dish served cold. It was forgetting to serve it at all, because you were too busy feasting at a banquet you had created for yourself. She was no longer Avery Walsh, the ghost in the penthouse. She was Avery Miller, the founder of Phoenix Arts, and she was finally home. Avery's story is a powerful reminder that our greatest transformations often begin in the ashes of a life that no longer serves us. It's a testament to the fact that being underestimated can be a secret superpower, giving you the space to rebuild yourself into someone unrecognizable to those who thought they knew you best. Her victory wasn't just in her success. It was in reclaiming her own identity, her own passions, and her own worth on her own terms. The ultimate justice wasn't seeing her ex-husband fall. It was being so busy rising that she barely noticed he was gone. If Avery's journey from an invisible wife to an unstoppable force inspired you or resonated with your own experiences, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable tales of transformation, resilience, and sweet, sweet justice. Thank you for listening.